Hey, real quick before you jump into the video you're about to see, if you like this video and you want more premium content like this, go check us out on thelandandthebible.com and subscribe for premium content. Welcome to this episode of the Land and the Bible podcast. How are you doing, Jameson?
Doing great.
That's good. I'm doing pretty well myself.
Slightly jet lagged. I flew in from Greece on Friday.
Okay.
So I'm just starting to feel like a human.
That's good.
So hopefully enough to focus.
How was the trip?
Awesome.
Okay.
Awesome.
Cool.
Yeah, we saw lots of beautiful water and mountains, and we also got to interact with lots of refugee people coming out of Afghanistan and Arab countries that we're working with over there. So that was pretty cool.
That's cool. That's awesome. Yeah, I would definitely want to hear more about that in the future, but
not today.
But not today. Not that
Moving
I don't
on.
care. No, I'm just kidding. But yeah, so we're starting this series right now called Bethlehem Stories. Mm-hmm. So tell me a little bit about this series and what we're going to be getting into.
Well, so I personally lived in Bethlehem for 10 years. So
yeah,
it's
not to brag or anything.
it's just to give it context in that Bethlehem was a special place to me.
Yeah.
You know, I actually lived there for 10 years. I have a child that was born there and, know it very, very well. And, over the course of my time there, I got to sort of dig in a little bit to the place, in its history. And what we want to look at over the course of 3 episodes is the 3 big Bible stories there, which is the Ruth story, the story of David's anointing, and of course the story of Jesus' birth. And, all those stories sort of line up with one another, right? Because it's really the story of Jesus's lineage, because Ruth is, a part of his lineage, and of course David is. And then, of course, you have Jesus' birth at the end of all that, culminating the whole process. And to me, the theme that unites all of that is God using the most unlikely people. Mm-hmm. So you've got a foreigner, the unwanted son, the least favorite. And then of course you have, Jesus, Mary, Joseph at the end. Mm-hmm. Also a pretty unlikely crew of characters that God uses to sort of tell his story and move the ball forward. And so that's, and I like that. I like that because, that makes me think, well, God can use me then, if he could use these guys, maybe
Perfect.
Maybe we're okay,
Yep.
So you don't have to be perfect. You can have a bad background. You can, have some major mistakes in your life. You can, you can whatever.
Yeah.
We'll
seems
get
like,
into it in detail. But,
my experience with that has been that those are the qualifying things.
Yeah.
Those are the things that actually qualify you to do the job.
Yeah, that's correct. Because it takes a little bit of, it helps you be humble, I guess, not to be a big old arrogant jerk. So yeah, for sure.
All right, that's cool. not always, but mistakes create wisdom. So maybe we'll see that. So what are we getting into for this first episode?
So we're going to start with Ruth. We'll just do it chronologically. So we'll start with Ruth, and we'll go from there. And with Ruth, well, let's just look at how the book begins. We don't know who wrote Ruth, but whoever the author was, they're a really, really good author. They do some interesting things with the text, and we may actually do Ruth as a series in detail later. So I don't want to go into super detail about the text, the story, what happens when she comes to Bethlehem, because I feel like there's way, way more there than we can get into in one story. What I really want to, zoom in on with these episodes is why these people were again unlikely, why they were not who you would, if it was a high school pickup, basketball or something, they would be the last people you would pick for your team, And so that's kind of what I want to get into. So I want to emphasize on that. And then, man, there's so much more that's there. And again, maybe later episodes. But this one, the way the book of Ruth starts like this. It says, during the time of the judges, there was a famine in the land. And a man left Bethlehem in Judah with his wife and 2 sons to stay in the territory of Moab for a while. Okay, so you have a family leaving Bethlehem and going to Moab. Once they get there, it says that Naomi's husband Elimelech died, and she was left with her 2 sons. Her sons took Moabite women as their wives. One was named Orpah, and the second was named Ruth. And it says, and after they lived in Moab about 10 years, both Mahlon and Chilion also died. Okay, so you have this process of Naomi and her husband and her children trying to avoid a famine, leaving Bethlehem, moving to Moab. They then the father dies. They marry 2 Moabite women. Then the sons die. And so Naomi is left alone with the 2 daughters-in-law. They're poor. They've been married for 10 years. They've not had children, which leads you to think that there was something else wrong there. That there must have been some sort of infertility or something. Something wasn't right there. There's just a ton of issues and brokenness there. But this is a text. We always want to put text in context. It's a text that was written at the time, during the time of the Old Testament, about Old Testament times, and all of those words that are used there in that introduction are loaded words. Okay, so there's a lot of meaning that would hit someone that was reading this at the time it's writing, or the next 2 or 3 centuries after. There's a lot of things that would just hit them out of that, and what would just really pound them was that you're leaving a place of blessing and going to a place of cursing. Okay, so you're in Judah, you're in the promised land, you're in the place God sent you, where He'll take care of you, those kind of things. You're in Bethlehem, which in Hebrew means the house of bread. You're in the place where and it's called that for a reason, by the way. Bethlehem is referred to, it's like in Hebrew, it's something like Bethlehem, so you have to be able to do those kind of sounds if you're going to speak Hebrew or Arabic. And lechem is the word for bread. So in anytime you see Bethel, Bethlehem, Bet Shemesh, Bet anything in the Bible, it's house of, and then the next word is going to tell you something about the place. And so Bethlehem is the house of bread, because at that time, and if you go there now, you'll think, farming grain here? But at that time, the answer is yes, you can farm grain there, not so much right in the city because it's kind of on a peak, but in the valleys that extend out from it, you can. And at that time, you have to understand this, this Middle Eastern context they're talking in. They didn't have Kansas, so they hadn't seen what, if you're going to industrially farm grain, it should look like this. But for them, there were low-lying valleys that had enough topsoil that you could farm grain, which is very important to them. And so there was enough of that around there. They're like, oh, this place is like the house of bread. This is a place you go to farm grain and get bread. Again, everything's relative, right?
Yeah.
So it was, and so you're leaving a place that's known for grain and for bread production and to be blessed, and you're going to a place that is certainly in a biblical context considered cursed. And so that we want to talk, that's what I was kind of going to camp on for a while, is why does this word Moab, why is it so packed with disgust and angst and anger and ooh, yuck, biblically? And it is.
Gotcha.
But Old Testament. So, which is, again, so why is Ruth unlikely? Because she's one of those people. And so who are those people? Well, so I want to read this. I don't normally want to read this much text, but I want you to get the hammer blows of what happens in Genesis 19.
Okay.
In my opinion, I think it's the most disgusting, repugnant act in the Bible, and that's saying a lot because the Bible is full of grotesque stuff.
Yeah.
But what happens between Lot and his daughters is just unbelievable, So I want you to hear this, right? It says Lot. This is Genesis 19, 30 through 38. It says Lot and his 2 daughters left Zoar and settled in the mountains for he was afraid to stay in Zoar. Now, this is right after the Sodom and Gomorrah event, right? So they just saw the world blow up, and they don't, who knows exactly how that took place? Was it a meteor or a comet, or what was the thing that happened there? But they saw this utter devastation. They think maybe everybody's dead, and so they go to live in a cave. It says he and his 2 daughters lived in a cave. One day the older daughter said to the younger, "Our father is old, and there is no man around here to give us children, as is the custom all over the earth. Let's get our father to drink wine and then sleep with him and preserve our family through our father." That night they got their father to drink wine, and the older daughter went in and slept with him. He was not aware of it when she lay down or when she got up. The next day the older daughter said to the younger, "Last night I slept with my father. Let's get him to drink wine again tonight, and you go in and sleep with him so we can preserve our family line through our father." They got their father to drink wine that night also, and the younger daughter went in and slept with him. Again, he was not aware of it when she lay down or when she got up. So both of Lot's daughters became pregnant by their father. The older daughter had a son, and she named him Moab. There's the word. He is the father of the Moabites of today. The younger daughter also had a son, and she named him Ben-Ami. He is the father of the Ammonites of today. So that's your national origin story.
Gotcha.
Okay. So, as Americans, our national origin story includes people like Thomas Jefferson and George Washington. We have these pictures of George Washington crossing the Delaware, to go fight a battle. And, we have, all these guys, like standing, in these, sort of court looking rooms, and they're, writing out the Constitution and things like that.
Right.
And that's our origin story, right? Well, the origin story for Moab is not like that.
Right.
Yeah. That's a tough one. Even, it's the Bible text, but even reading it, you're like, ugh.
Yeah.
It just hits you in the gut, and it's gross, the way around that. And you think like, what is wrong with these girls? And then you also think, what's wrong with their dad?
Yeah.
It's a mess, And so that's recorded. Mm-hmm. And anyone who is an Israelite would know this is the origin story for these people. These people were born out of incest, out of, a disgusting act. And I obviously in our current world, we have, racial and cultural issues, but I don't think we quite understand how important ancestry and roots were, in the ancient world. Mm-hmm. So like you read throughout the Bible, Israelites constantly want to say, we are the children of Abraham and Isaac and of Jacob. Like, they want to say, like, look at our ancestry. Abraham, he was pretty good. He left his home, he wanted to kill his own son. He did all this stuff. He had miracles. He heard from God. He's a prophet. Those are, and they really want to say, look at our founder. Look how great he was. And we're his seed, if you would. And the idea is that the seed somehow takes on, or the branches of the tree that grows up from that takes on the nature of the seed. Later in talking about, Jesus and the Messiah, it was like, mm-hmm. He will be a branch of Jesse. He will come from the house of David. And that's a big deal. David is the founder of the house, and therefore the house should somehow take on his characteristics. And that's a big sort of, brag thing. Paul talks about that in the New Testament. He talks about, I'm from the tribe of this, and, I'm from Israel and the tribe of Benjamin. And he gives all those credentials. Now, later he says, and by the way, they're garbage. All that matters is knowing, Christ and his suffering. But still, people cared about that kind of stuff mm-hmm. deeply. And there was this thought that where you come from and who you come from impacts who you are. And if that's your origin story, it's not good, And I would say in Middle Eastern culture, even till now, that's pretty normal.
Yeah.
When I was directing the school over there, for a few years or several years, we would interview employees periodically. And so, I would interview, let's say somebody wanted to come on and be a science teacher or something like that, right? And of course, we were English language school, so I could do the interview in English and all that kind of stuff. And English is widely spoken over there, and our school was like that. So it's just a normal interview. You bring a candidate in. Can we see your transcripts? Can we see your that you qualify to teach whatever physics or something? Yeah, here they are. And I would ask, so have you got experience? What are your I would do things a normal Westerner would do. If I had one of my Arab administrators in the room with me, at some point they would say, "What's your last name?" Because they care. And they'd be like, "Oh, that's a good family." Or they'd be like, okay. And later they would tell me, like, "That's not a good family. You shouldn't hire them." Because that is still a part of that culture, that Middle Eastern culture. It's like, who do you come from? And sort of like shame or honor or credit or discredit kind of hits a group, And so if that's your origin, it's not good.
Yeah.
Well, so then it kind of carries on, and the next time we see the Moabites, they show up in Numbers 25, and depending on your translation, it reads slightly differently, but the point is the same. It says, and again, I want to read a little more text than normal in this one also, because I also want you to understand how harsh the environment this is happening is in. So Numbers 25, to understand the background on that, the children of Israel have left Egypt. They're wandering, and they bump into the Moabites. Okay? And it says, while Israel was staying in the acacia grove, the people began to have sexual relations with the women of Moab. And depending on your translation, sometimes it will say they began to prostitute themselves with. One translation was a little bit older English, said they went a whoring with, So, but it's clear what's happening.
Yeah.
That the women of Moab are kind of like infiltrating the Israelite camp, and they've been sent there. It's like they've been sort of like weaponized, if you would, and their job is to go in and to, somehow pervert or I don't know what's the word I'm looking for, but to sort of pollute somehow the men of Israel, to disqualify them from serving God, to bring them down to everybody else's level. So this is kind of what's going on. So so again, you have to think like this kind of text is being written and it's being circulated amongst the Jewish population who would all know these things. And what they're saying is like, look at these people, what they are willing to do. They're willing to, again, sort of sexually weaponize their women, send them off, to go sleep with those guys, to make them unclean or something like that. So it's a odd story. It says the women invited them to the sacrifices for their gods, and the people ate and bowed in worship to their gods. So Israel aligned itself with Baal of Peor, and the Lord's anger burned against Israel. Okay, so a lot of things you have to understand about that. In the ancient Near East, in pagan worship, Canaanite. So you have Canaanite paganism, which you hear a lot about in the Old Testament with people like Baal. It's really like Baal and Asherah and those kind of things. And then on the other side of the Jordan River, with Ammon, Moab, and Edom, they had sort of different names and slight variations on similar things. So the Canaanites, had Baal, Asherah, and Moloch were their kind of primary deities. And Chemosh was the main deity for the Moabites, and he's mentioned several times in the Old Testament. Like if you sort of just like word search that, constantly the Moabites referred to as the people of Chemosh, or it says eventually Solomon married a Moabite woman, and one of his hundreds of wives, and he built for her a temple. And in that passage it says a temple to the detestable Chemosh was built, in Jerusalem, the hills around it. So what does that mean? So they've got this god, this pagan thing. Well, Canaanite paganism almost always included two elements. It almost always included what I'm going to refer to as temple prostitution, which means that you had both priests and priestesses who engaged in sexual activity as a form of worship of those gods. Typically, you had a lot of fertility gods and goddesses, and so that fertility refers to both your fields and your crops, but also yourself. Mm-hmm. And so, what better way to reenact fertility, I suppose, than to have sexual relations. And so there was always a sexual component, which is what's happening here, because it's clear that it's not just sexual, that by having these sexual acts and sort of becoming polluted in that way, that they're also worshiping those gods. So what it seems happened is that the women offered themselves to Israelite men, but it was as a part of, not only are you not are we having sex, but also you're accepting our gods and our worship and stuff like that. And so that's so then God is really, really, really not happy at that point. And it says, the Lord said, take all the leaders of the people and execute them in broad daylight before the Lord, so his burning anger may turn away from Israel. So Moses told Israel's judge, kill each of the men who had aligned themselves with Baal. And an Israelite man came bringing a Midianite woman. So Midian and Moab can be mixed a little bit. Mm. So Midianites weren't actually from Moab, but they would move through there. So same category. Gotcha. So he brought this woman to his relatives in the sight of Moses and the whole Israelite community while they were weeping at the entrance of the tent of meeting. When Phinehas, son of Eleazar, son of Aaron, the priest, saw this, he got up from the assembly, took a spear in his hand, and followed the Israelite man into the tent and drove it through both the Israelite man and the woman, through her belly. So the one spear goes through both of them. The implication is, of course, that they're having sex, mm-hmm. and that he, goes in the tent while they're doing that, and kills them both with one spear. Then the plague on the Israelites was stopped, but those who died in the plague was numbered 24,000. Okay, so in the memory of Jewish Hebrew Israelites, the people that are living at the time of Ruth, they've got these two events. Mm-hmm. Moabites are gross and disgusting. They were founded like this. Moabites are really gross and disgusting. Look in the Bible. This thing happened where they sent their women to do stuff with our boys, and God approved of someone killing one of them in the act. So that's all there. And so later you roll the clock forward and you get this statement in Deuteronomy. In Deuteronomy 23 and 24, you have a series of statements about how to treat foreigners. Okay. And so what's going on there, well, it's pretty clear, right? What's going on is, the general pattern is, hey, you used to be foreigners, so be nice. That's the general pattern. Okay. So it sounds like this. Deuteronomy 23, 7-8. Do not despise an Edomite, because he is your brother. Do not despise an Egyptian, because you are a resident alien in his land. The children born to them in the third generation may enter the Lord's assembly. So this means they can become fully a part of Jewish temple worship. So if an Edomite or an Egyptian moves in, then their grandchildren get to be fully integrated. It takes a couple generations, but we're going to integrate them. We're going to treat them fairly and kindly while they're here. And within 2 generations, we're going to be like, hey, you're one of us. Okay, so it's, fairly good. Deuteronomy 24 says, do not deny justice to a resident alien or fatherless child, and do not take a widow's garment as security. Remember that you were a slave in Egypt, and the Lord redeemed you from there. Therefore, I'm commanding you to do this. So in other words, hey, foreigners living, working among you. And there's a whole series of verses that echo that, where it says, hey, if they're working for you, pay them their wages. Hey, if they're passing through, don't abuse them. Hey, don't, there's this constant ring of, treat non-Jews who are living in or passing through your land well. But then you get this. Deuteronomy 23:3 and 6. I'll read these 2 verses. It says, no Ammonite or Moabite may enter the Lord's assembly. Okay? Ever. And it says, none of their descendants, even to the 10th generation, may ever enter the Lord's assembly. You skip down 3 verses from that, and it says, never pursue their welfare or prosperity as long as you live. Okay?
Yeah, that's pretty direct.
Yeah.
Pretty clear.
It's clear that we don't like these people.
Yeah.
You know, and that they are in a special category of gross and icky and bad. And I mean, I don't want to go too far down this road, but it, I don't know. It definitely offends our current morality. You know,
Right.
You're like, well, you can't do that. You can't label like a whole like race of people and say, well, be nice to everybody but them.
Yeah.
You know, but I mean, that's what's in the text. So
Yeah.
it's sort of a, you know,
Yeah.
we can talk about Old Testament theology later, like what you do with it. I would just say in general, it was for a specific time and place, and not universalized.
Yeah, there's so many things in the Old Testament that are like them setting themselves apart as a nation, right?
Yeah.
Because there was so much dysfunction and corruption, and they were susceptible to so much as had happened in the past, and that's what that is, right? That's
I think so. That's exactly what it is. Actually, it's an astute observation. Yeah, but that's exactly right. In that, for whatever reason, it's actually clear. It's not that hard to figure out. So, if you live in Israel, what you find is that the climate it's a funny climate.
Yeah.
So in Jerusalem, the annual total rainfall is only about 6 inches less than London. Well, that makes you think, well, this place should be very green. But the problem is that rainfall, 90% of it comes in about 10 weeks. So we have really, really heavy rainfall in the winter, so the back half of December, January, and February. Like, don't ever, ever, ever go on a Holy Land tour in January. It'll rain 20-something days in January.
Yeah.
So there's no point, unless you just love.
Good prices, though?
Yeah, good prices. And if you love, for it to be like 40 degrees and rain, then it's great.
Oh, that sounds wonderful.
Yeah, where it's like not quite cold enough to freeze, but it just rains all the time. That's exactly what the winter's like there.
Okay.
We only get snow like once every 2 or 3 years, but it just hovers just above freezing and rains all the time. It's lovely. So anyway.
Really selling it.
Well, I'm selling it for the spring. Come in like March and April. It's absolutely wonderful. It still rains a little bit in March and April, and it keeps its green. All the flowers are blooming. Lovely, lovely in the spring. Winter, oof.
Yep.
By the second half of February, you can come. Anyway, you have that strange pattern, and what happens is that we have occasional years where, for whatever reason, those winter rains don't quite come, or they don't hit like they're supposed to. And since you get all of your rain in this tight window, if for whatever reason the rain doesn't come in that window, that gets disrupted, well, then you're going to wait now 8 or 9 more months for rain again, because it doesn't rain at all in the summer, like not at all. Typically the first rains come, like you might get a shower, like it's a drop, in September or October. Really, the first rains come like in November, and then they're typically finished by March, but they're real heavy. And the word in Arabic for rain actually means cold and rain. They don't have any comprehension of that it can be hot outside and rain. So I like when I've brought Arab kids here to the United States before, I'm from South Alabama, so it just rains all the time in the summer, and it's 100 degrees and 140% humidity. It's awful. But they will literally ride out in the car with their hands out, and they'll just look amazed and say, like, it's hot and there's rain.
Yeah.
Why is it hot and there's rain? It's just something they can't
That's
quite
really
wrap their heads around, because they've never seen it before. Well, in that kind of environment, where if those rains will come, then we got plenty of water and the crops will grow, and it's actually quite bountiful. But if that rain doesn't come, then we got a problem, because there's no window for raining in for several months. And, and I lived there long enough to observe that can kind of come and go in waves, that sometimes you can have 2 or 3 years in a row where the rain is below average, and then things get real tight. Even today, even modern times, the water supply gets really squeezed and things like that, and those kind of cycles. So if you're living like that, there's no Walmart Supercenter. There's no, they're not importing beef from Argentina and stuff like that. They didn't have the stuff that we can do now, and you're basically planting and harvesting to eat, and planting and harvesting to eat. Then a fertility cult becomes very, very attractive. The idea that this religion is promising, Baal and Asherah, or male and female, basically sex and fertility gods, that if you'll do these things, then your land will be fertile. If you do these things, your trees will be fertile, your sheep with goats, whatever. And that's just, there's a pull there, right? Now, in addition to that, you just have the fact that humans are sinful and dirty and gross, and hey, you could have sex at the temple, So you have all that going on, and it was attractive. Mm-hmm. And the children of Israel, you see it over and over and over again, would go in that direction. So yes, I do think that some of, why is this in the text, is that, God was trying to set them apart. Stop going there, stop doing that. Yeah. But yeah, to our modern sensibilities, it's just like, what? He ran a tent and slammed a spear through both of them, and God was like, good job, move on, Like we read those texts and we're like, whoa. Yeah. But that's the backdrop.
Yeah.
Okay. So in that backdrop, they go to Moab. And you're like, well, why would they even go there? Well, the reason they go there is because Moab is a little bit drought proofed, because they have big springs down in the Dead Sea Valley on the what is now Jordan side. There are big, strong springs there, so that you can, even when it's not raining like it's supposed to, there's water and you can grow some things. And in all likelihood, that's why they went. But at a spiritual level, it's scandalous to go there, and it's scandalous to take wives from them. Mm-hmm. And so, anyone sort of reading the story is like, at the time of its writing, would be kind of like, woof. So later on in Ruth chapter 1, when Ruth makes her sort of declaration of loyalty to Naomi and her people, I'm looking at the text right now. It reads like this. It says, do not plead with me to abandon you, or to return and not follow you. For wherever you go, I will go. Wherever you live, I will live. Your people will be my people, and your God will be my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. May the Lord punish me, and do so severely, if anything but death separates you and me. Now, one funny thing about that is it's often read at weddings, and it's a statement from a daughter-in-law to a mother-in-law, which is kind of interesting. It's not, it sounds sort of romantic, but it's daughter-in-law to mother-in-law. This statement of like attachment. What I think what's going on in that text is because you read the Deuteronomy stuff and you're like, well, she should not be accepted, and her descendants shouldn't be accepted, to 10 generations. But it seems that somehow she was accepted as having sort of like converted. Because she says, your people will be my people and your God's my God. And then you have Ruth throughout the story acting really heroically, and you have her acting with a great level of like loyalty and faithfulness to Naomi, and just in general. And I think, getting back to that idea of unlikely people, that what you have in the text here is you have God doing something really, really interesting, where he takes, again, in my opinion, the most disturbing, disgusting act maybe in the whole Bible, and he takes the product of that and he weaves it back into his story and redeems it. which is crazy, but if we believe in redemption and we believe that God can take anybody or anything and fix it and bring it back and make it right, then I think what's happening in the Bible here, I think it's clear actually, is that God is redeeming the most disgusting people and the most disgusting thing. And he's like, look, here's one of them, but look at how she's acting, and she's come back to me. And not only are we going to accept her, but if you know the Ruth story, which again we'll probably get into in more detail later, not only is she being accepted, she's going to marry in, she's going to marry Boaz, and then she's going to become one of David's ancestors. So David, the great king of Israel, one of his ancestors, is now a Moabitess whose lineage goes back to that cave, and eventually Jesus comes from that line. And so I to me, and the reason I wanted to delve into these stories is you just see God saying, yeah, I can use anything. I can use anybody. I can fix anything. I can redeem anything. Let's take what's the grossest thing we know about Moabites and that thing. Okay, let's weave that into the story. Which is why I think it's actually really, really cool.
Yeah, no, that's great. Yeah, it's definitely applicable. I mean, people that it's interesting. What we were just reading, when you see those rules and in Deuteronomy and you think, that echoes with, I would think, how a lot of people outside the church think about the church. They're like, oh, well, you don't want to, that you have your holy huddle and everyone's
holy in there. And you look at us as being sort of gross and bad.
Yeah, and it can be, right? I mean, the church and culture can feel like that, but it's actually supposed to be more like this, which is everyone's weaved into the story. Everyone's welcome. Yeah,
for sure. Like at whatever point you think you deserve whatever from God, that's probably not okay. The story of the gospel is you don't deserve.
Right.
And you are, we talked about this some in the Easter stuff. But if you're reading the story and you're reading, yourself in the story as Jesus, that's probably a problem. Mm-hmm. You're Pilate, you're Judas, you're Peter, and it's like this. If you're reading the story and you're like, yeah, I'm Boaz, I'm the hero from the pure lineage who's gonna go out and take care of this girl. Well, I hope you are sometimes, but I mean, maybe more of us are the person who was born on the wrong side of the tracks in the not so great family who, was, at the point just before Ruth marries Boaz, if you sort of look at her credentials, she is a poor, barren, seemingly, she's, married 10 years, no children, poor, barren foreigner from a hated racial group with a grumpy, bitter old mother-in-law in tow. You're like who wants to marry that? Like she didn't have a whole lot going for it, really.
Yeah.
But God redeems it, and she gets married, she has a baby, and she has a joyous life, and then is a part of God's story, and I think the same holds true for us. That you can find yourself in a situation maybe like that, where your life looks like it's just absolutely wrecked. You don't have much. Why would anybody want to be involved with you? Why would God want to be involved with you? But God's like, no, just, basically all Ruth did to set herself up was she basically just said, okay, God, I'm going to be loyal to you and your people and be as faithful as I know how to be. And God was like, yeah, it's enough. I can work with that, mm-hmm. And everything changed. So yeah, I think that's sort of, I don't know, Bethlehem story number one.
Very cool. I like it. So what are we looking at we done with Ruth in this context for this story?
Yeah, I think so. We may look at the whole story in more detail later, but yeah, I think in the context of, God using the most unlikely people, yeah, I think we're good. Next time we'll look at David and why he was unlikely.
Okay, cool. That sounds great. Awesome. Well, that's the first episode of Bethlehem Stories, and looking forward to a couple more of those. And as always, for more content, check us out on thelandandthebible.com.
Hey guys, if you like our content, please click like and subscribe. That really helps us out a lot. And then also go to thelandandthebible.com and subscribe for premium content. If you go over there, we've got tons of stuff that's really great. We have print materials that you can download. We have PDF study guides for all of our lessons. We've got devotional materials over there. We also have every single video and podcast we've done in full-length format with no ad interruptions and full video. So you can get all of that on thelandandthebible.com with the premium subscription, and that really helps us. It helps us generate more content, and also half of it goes to help us go overseas and help refugee kids is what we're really called to do.